Blake Lively is back in the headlines. And honestly, not in the way she probably hoped, because just when it seemed like the whole Justin Baldoni lawsuit drama was finally dying down, her lawyer went and gave everyone a brand new reason to keep talking. And when you combine that with what the judge has been saying lately, it's getting really hard to imagine how Blake walks away from all of this with her career still intact. So, here's what happened. A reporter named Elsie walked right up to Blake Lively's lawyer and asked her a very simple, very direct question. She wanted to know whether this entire lawsuit was actually about standing up for women, like Blake's team had been saying from the beginning, or whether it was really just about the money and the attorney fees under California's Civil Code Section 47.1. And honestly, that question cut right to the heart of everything, because Blake had spent months positioning herself as this champion for workplace safety and women's rights. That was the whole narrative her team was pushing. So when someone finally asks the lawyer, point blank, "Is this about justice, or is this about cash?" You'd expect a confident, clear answer, right? That's not what happened. Blake Lively's lawyer completely froze. She couldn't answer directly. She started talking about how great the California law was, stumbling through this awkward non-answer, and then she literally rushed away to avoid any follow-up questions. The whole thing was caught on camera, and look, I've watched a lot of these legal PR moments, and that right there was one of the most revealing things I've seen. Because when your lawyer can't answer whether your lawsuit is about justice, that tells you everything you need to know. Now, to really understand why that question hit so hard, you have to know what California Civil Code Section 47.1 actually is. This law was not written for Blake Lively. It was designed to protect everyday people from being dragged into defamation lawsuits by powerful individuals trying to silence them. It was meant for people who genuinely couldn't fight back. So when Blake's legal team decided to use this law as the foundation of their strategy, they weren't just misreading the room. They were trying to take a protection meant for vulnerable people and turn it into a way to fund their own massive legal bills. And people noticed, but here's where it gets even messier. Just days before the trial was supposed to start, Blake's team agreed to a secret settlement where she basically got nothing. She dropped her primary claims, waived her right to appeal, and abandoned the Title VII retaliation case entirely. And then, within hours of signing those settlement papers, Blake Lively was at the Met Gala, smiling on the red carpet, wearing archival Versace with a custom train, acting like none of this had ever happened. And I'm sorry, but that image, that specific sequence of events, that's the moment a lot of people stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. Because if you genuinely believed you were fighting for something important, if you truly thought this case was about protecting women in the workplace, you don't settle in secret and then immediately show up at fashion's biggest night out like you just finished a spa weekend. That's not what righteous indignation looks like. Now, here's a detail that absolutely stunned me when I first heard it. The woman who actually wrote California Civil Code 47.1, her name is Victoria Burke, and she drafted this law after surviving a deeply personal ordeal. She spent over a year researching and writing it specifically to help people who had no power against the system. So when Blake's legal team decided to use this law, you'd think they'd at least reach out to Victoria properly, right? Maybe have a real conversation, maybe ask her what she thought. What they actually did was send her a group email casually announcing that Blake was going to take the 47.1 law national. No consultation, no real discussion, just a group email treating her life's work like a press release for a product launch. Victoria was completely blindsided, and it gets worse. Blake's lawyers then tried to secretly rewrite the legislation behind her back, adding broad attorney protection provisions that Victoria had specifically opposed. Because she knew exactly what they were trying to do, they wanted to turn her victim-focused bill into something that would line their own pockets. When Victoria eventually appeared on Megyn Kelly's show, you could hear the frustration in her voice. She said flat out that she did not want the judge to grant attorney fees to Blake Lively, the creator of the law, publicly on television saying she doesn't want the law used this way. That's not a minor thing. That's the entire foundation of Blake's legal strategy collapsing in real time. And then the actual legal mistakes started piling up. And these were not minor slip-ups. These were the kind of errors that make you wonder what exactly Blake was paying for. The first big one was when her team filed claims under California Civil Code 51.9 for a film that was shot entirely in New Jersey. You cannot apply California state law to something that happened in another state. That's not a technicality. That's first-year law school material. The judge dismissed that claim. And in the process, Blake's team had to hand over all of her private communications during discovery before anyone even addressed this obvious jurisdictional problem. So Blake surrendered her private data to the opposition because her lawyers didn't catch something that fundamental. Then there was the breach of contract claim, which ended up backfiring spectacularly. Blake's lawyers were accusing Wayfair Studios of breaching the contract, but the judge pointed out that Blake herself had taken a significant number of sick days and left the production early. So while they were pointing fingers at Wayfair, they accidentally exposed their own client to counterclaims that she had breached her contract first. The corporate fallout was real too. Kroger, one of her biggest retail partners, reportedly described the situation as leaving a negative taste. Other major partners were quietly asking for the controversy to settle down because they didn't want their brands anywhere near this. And when you lay out all of these legal fumbles side by side, a very clear pattern emerges. Filing under the wrong jurisdiction led to complete dismissal and handed the opposition a roadmap. Allowing full discovery before fixing the jurisdiction problem meant surrendering every private communication Blake had. Arguing contract breach without checking their own client's record exposed Blake to the exact same accusations. Sending that group email to Victoria Burke turned the law's own author against them in the court of public opinion, and leaking Taylor Swift's text messages destroyed Blake's most valuable personal relationship in the entire industry. Each one of these mistakes made the next one worse, and behind all those polished red carpet appearances and carefully worded press statements, what was actually happening inside Blake's camp was pure panic. Because here's the thing about Taylor Swift being dragged into this. Blake's entire social standing in Hollywood was built on that friendship. When you're part of Taylor Swift's inner circle, you have this invisible layer of protection around you. The collective goodwill of the most popular artist on the planet kind of rubs off on everyone around her. So, when Justin Baldoni's lawyers subpoenaed text messages between Blake and Taylor, that wasn't just a legal move. That was a wrecking ball aimed directly at Blake's support system. And it worked. Taylor quietly stepped back, and suddenly Blake was standing in the middle of all of this completely alone, trying to smile her way through it at the Fendi show and the Met Gala, while the entire foundation underneath her was cracking. Now, Victoria Burke actually said something that I think is one of the most significant quotes to come out of this whole situation. She mentioned that when Blake's name first came up in connection with 47.1, a friend left her a 7-minute voicemail warning her not to get involved. 7 minutes. That's not a casual concern. That's someone who knew exactly what was coming. And Victoria said she actually met Blake and had reservations even then. When she eventually went public with her opposition, she described feeling sick when she realized the law was being used as part of a PR campaign. Her exact words were that she was unhappy with it being weaponized as a redemption tool, and she made it very clear she did not think the judge should grant attorney fees in this matter. That statement is devastating for Blake's team because the attorney fees were the last thing they were still fighting for after the settlement. The main lawsuit was done, the gag orders were signed, but the attorney fee application was still sitting there on the docket, and Blake's lawyers were clinging to it because they needed to get paid somehow. Blake was reportedly refusing to pay them directly, so getting the court to award fees was their last opportunity at any kind of financial recovery from this entire disaster. And then Judge Lyman stepped in, and what he did made it very clear he was not interested in playing along with any of it. On May 28, 2026, he filed a new order scheduling a mandatory in-person hearing for June 1st, just days away, and gave both sides an extremely compressed timeline to submit letter briefs before oral arguments. This was not normal legal scheduling. Judges don't typically compress timelines like this unless they want answers, and they want them fast. Justin Baldoni's legal team read it exactly right when they said that Lyman appeared to see that Blake's team was trying to get a one-sided evidentiary hearing without proper due process. The judge wasn't allowing that to happen. Now let's talk about Blake's brand situation, because this part of the story doesn't get enough attention, and honestly, it might be the most permanent damage of everything. Her hair care line, Blake Brown, launched in 2024 with a big, exclusive partnership with Target. The early projections were genuinely impressive. Insiders were talking about this becoming a multi-$100-million brand, but then her controversies exploded right at the exact moment the brand needed to be performing. And Target was already dealing with their own public backlash over DEI initiatives and pride collections. So you had a brand that needed maximum retail momentum landing in the middle of two separate PR disasters at the same time. The numbers that came out are brutal. Blake Brown reportedly saw a retail sales decline of somewhere between 56% and 78%. A brand that was initially valued at around $100 million saw its projected 2025 sales fall to under $15 million. That's not underperformance, that's a collapse. And then Betty Buzz, her non-alcoholic mixer line, officially shut down and ceased operations in May 2025. Gone. The only thing left in her beverage portfolio was Betty Booze, the alcoholic version, which was now expected to carry all the overhead and brand expectations by itself, while Kroger and other retail partners were actively trying to distance themselves from her name. Hollywood studios are very calculating about this. Justin Baldoni's attorney said it plainly during the proceedings. She called Blake's application for attorney fees an end run around the jury trial that Blake had avoided by settling. And that framing is exactly right. Blake waived her right to a jury trial when she agreed to settle. And now her lawyers were asking the judge to essentially act as that jury and hand them money anyway. Without Blake ever having to take the witness stand, without her ever having to answer questions under oath about the leaked panic emails, the corporate backlash, the jurisdictional mistakes, any of it. And that's actually the key to understanding why the settlement happened when it did. Because the moment Blake Lively stepped into that courtroom as a witness, everything changes. The PR protection disappears. The carefully worded statements from her publicist mean nothing. You're under oath. Opposing counsel is asking the questions, and you have to answer. Her own lawyers reportedly made it very clear to her that going to trial would force exactly that. And internal sources indicated that by that point, the attorney-client relationship had completely broken down. Blake was apparently exploring the possibility of suing her own lawyers for malpractice, claiming their poor strategy had permanently damaged her brand and cost her enormously. But here's where it got really uncomfortable for Blake. Her lawyers held significant leverage over her. They reportedly made clear that if she pushed forward with a malpractice case or tried to force the trial, they would expose the most damaging detail of the entire situation, that the original claims were exaggerated. So Blake was trapped on two sides. She couldn't go to trial without facing cross-examination that would destroy her publicly, and she couldn't go after her own lawyers without them burning everything down on their way out. The secret settlement was the only exit available to her. She took it, walked away with nothing, dropped everything, and went straight to the Met Gala. Now, I want to step back for a moment because I think it's worth talking about what this whole situation actually cost the people around Blake. Victoria Burke spent over a year of her life writing a law that came from a deeply personal place. She built something meant to protect people who had no voice, and then she watched it get picked up by one of the most recognizable celebrities in the world and turned into a vehicle for recovering legal fees. Victoria said she felt sick when she realized what was happening, that the bill she had invested herself into was being used as a PR redemption tool. She didn't sign up for that. She didn't agree to that. And the fact that Blake's lawyers tried to secretly rewrite the legislation without informing her, adding attorney protection clauses that Victoria specifically opposed, that's not a legal strategy. That's a betrayal of someone who was never even supposed to be in this story. And then there are the people who showed up to protest outside the courthouse, regular people who genuinely believed they were supporting something meaningful, who thought this lawsuit was about accountability in Hollywood and protection for workers. And what they were actually supporting was a secret settlement negotiated to protect a celebrity's brand and get lawyers paid. Those protesters are going to go home and eventually piece together that the righteous crusade they showed up for was resolved quietly in a back room while Blake was getting fitted for her Met Gala look. That's a hard thing to sit with. Blake Lively's career didn't collapse because of one bad decision or one viral moment. It collapsed through a very long sequence of choices, each one making the next worse. It collapsed when her lawyers filed California state law claims for a New Jersey film set and handed the opposition her private communications in the process. It collapsed when they tried to use a victim protection law as a fee recovery mechanism, and the woman who wrote that law went on television to oppose them. It collapsed when Taylor Swift's name got pulled into Discovery and Blake lost the one relationship in Hollywood that had been shielding her from full cancellation. It collapsed when Betty Buzz shut down, when Blake Brown's sales fell through the floor, when Kroger started asking for the negative chatter to stop, when Amazon MGM quietly moved her sequel from theaters to streaming without making any announcement about it. And it finally completely collapsed when her own legal filings admitted $56 million in lost future acting wages, because that number is not a negotiating position. That's a confession. That's Blake Lively's team telling a federal court that the studios have stopped calling, the brand deals are gone, and the only money left to recover exists inside a courtroom rather than in Hollywood. Judge Lyman's accelerated hearing schedule sent a message that traveled well beyond the courtroom. When a judge compresses timelines and demands in-person answers under judicial sanction, that signal reaches studio boardrooms and corporate sponsor offices. It confirms that the legal strategy was not just unsuccessful, but transparently opportunistic. And that confirmation is something Blake cannot spin her way out of, no matter how elegant the dress is or how perfectly she smiles on a red carpet. What makes this story genuinely different from other celebrity scandals is the documentation. Most controversies live and die in the press cycle. This one is written into federal court records, the jurisdictional errors, the discovery failures, the contract breach exposure, the Victoria Burke emails. All of it is sitting in a docket that anyone can read. Blake cannot reframe what's in those documents. She cannot issue a statement that contradicts what her own lawyers filed under oath. California Civil Code, Section 47.1 will survive this. Victoria Burke's work will continue protecting the people it was always meant to protect. The law itself isn't damaged. What's damaged is the credibility of everyone who tried to use it as something it was never designed to be. So when people ask whether Blake Lively can recover from this, I think the honest answer is that the question itself might be outdated. The recovery window required maintaining enough industry goodwill to weather the storm. That window needed brand partnerships holding steady, studio relationships staying warm, and the public narrative staying manageable. None of those conditions exist anymore. The partnerships collapsed, the studios downgraded her, the public watched her lawyer stammer through a question about justice versus money on camera, and drew their own conclusions. That stammering, deflecting, rushing away moment her lawyer had outside the court. That went viral because it confirmed what a lot of people had already started to suspect, that this was never really about justice, that it was about controlling a narrative, recovering legal costs, and protecting a brand that was already in free fall. And once people see that clearly, it's very hard to unsee it. The question now isn't whether Blake Lively's career survives. It's whether California's victim protection laws get strengthened so that this kind of misuse becomes harder to attempt in the future, and whether the celebrities who are watching all of this unfold take the right lesson from it. Because the wrong lesson is that Blake went too far publicly. The right lesson is that the courtroom documents everything, and everything eventually comes out.